At this point, I bet you're kind of wondering why you signed up for a Git course. Well, the fact is, guys, you can't avoid it. GitHub is built on Git. So in order to use it properly, you need to learn at least the basics of it. You might have also noticed with everything that we've done so far, it's been local on our machines. Well, Git is a distributed version control system. If you remember, we talked about that earlier, and that means that every client has its own project repository. Well, GitHub allows us to have a remote Git repository. So we're going to explore the process of establishing remote repos in a little bit more detail later on. Right now, however, I want to show you how to take everything we've done so far and push your local files to a remote repo. And in order to do that, we first have to have one. So we're going to jump into GitHub really quickly and create one. So I'm in GitHub. I've signed into my account. And there are a couple of places where you can create a new repo. Down here at the bottom right-hand corner, I can see there's a little button that says New Repository. If I go up to the menu up top, there's a little plus symbol beside your account name, and that's your Create New. And if you grab that pull-down menu, New Repo is the very first choice. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. I'm going to create a new repo for us. The first thing we have to do is give the repository a name. And I'm just going to go ahead and do git-basics. As you can tell from autocomplete, I've had a little bit of practice doing that. All right, now that is the exact same directory name as we have on our local repo. They don't have to match. If you're wondering, can you name it something else? Absolutely you can. The name of the repo really doesn't matter other than the fact that you want it to be something memorable, something that once you start establishing a lot of repos, you know who it is. I'm going to give it a little bit of a description too. I'm going to come in here and say remote repo to help me test out my Git skills. And of course, that's spelled with a Z because, skills. I'm going to make this public instead of private. I can't make it private because I'm using the free account, but it's a public repository. That means anybody can see it. And I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with people knowing that I'm learning Git. I could initialize it with a README. I already have that, so I don't need to do that. We're not going to do a git ignore or a license because I'll talk about both of those options a little bit later on. We just want the bare bones remote repository. I'm going to go ahead and create this. And as soon as I do that, I get a couple of lines of information here. First is a quick setup if you've done this kind of thing before. Next is teaching us how to create a new repository on the command line. Now that would be if we started our project here and then we wanted to pull it local. And then below that, we have push an existing repository from the command line, and that's what we want to do. So it actually gives us all the code that we need to enter into our terminal window. So if you're adverse to typing, you could copy and paste this. But I kind of want to walk you through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the quick setup, and I'm just going to copy to the clipboard the URL for my remote repository. Now, obviously, yours is going to be different than mine, so pay attention to what your remote URL is. Copy that so that when we get to that point in the terminal window, you're entering the right path. All right, I'm going to go back into my terminal, and the first thing I need to do is add my remote repository. So I'm going to do git remote add origin. Now, you might see origin from time to time and think that you have to use that. You don't. You can actually use any name you want. This is going to be the reference name for this remote repository. Origin is basically kind of the standard default name that's used for the master branch of the remote repository. So unless there's a really good reason for you to change it, don't. Leave it as origin. Next thing I'm going to do is paste in the URL that was given to me by GitHub, and I'll hit return. No error message means that that worked great. Perfect. So now that we've established where our remote repository is, we need to push up files to it. And to do that, we're going to use git push. And we'll talk a little bit later on about push and fetch and clone and kind of pull and what all those things do. For right now, what push is going to do is going to take all of our local repository files and it's going to push them up into this remote repository so that those two are mirrored. Then I'm going to do a -u origin master. Now, before you hit return, let me walk you through what all this is doing. So the -u there, that's shorthand for upstream. Essentially, what upstream means is origin is the remote that we're pushing to. Master is the local branch that we're pushing. So we're pushing master to origin. That -u, which is optional, we don't have to do that. That's essentially, it's short for upstream, as I mentioned, but what it's doing is it's establishing a link between those two branches. And so from now on, if I'm in the master branch and I just do a git push, it knows that automatically that I want to push it to origin instead of some other branch or some other repo. So it knows where to put it, basically. When I hit return, first thing it's going to do is ask me for a username and a password. Now, if you use the OS 10 Keychain Credential Manager earlier when we did the config, you'll probably only have to do this one time. If you don't set that up, you have to do this every time, and it's a real pain. So I'm just going to type in James Will Web 2, which is my account, and then my password, and return. And there it goes. So 58 done, data compression, tells you all sorts of really cool stuff that you're never going to pay attention to. Now, you'll notice that it says a little bit further down, it shows you where it's sending it to. And it's showing you that you have a new branch. Basically, it ported your master branch to your remote origin. So branch master is set up to track the remote branch master from origin. So master is set up now to track the remote branch. Awesome. If I do a git status, I can see that everything is good. Now, if I go back to GitHub and refresh this page, now instead of seeing the setup information, cool, I actually see my repo. There are all my files. How cool is that? Now I have a remote repository on GitHub, and I am giddy about that. That is so cool. Notice that GitHub is really, really smart. It shows you the commit message for each one of these elements when they were first committed. So we know, for example, that scripts hasn't been changed since the initial commit. We know that fonts, we did a commit where we added those. CSS, the last one was merging the branch bug fix, added styles for common page elements. So that sort of thing. You'll also notice that it took advantage of the fact that there is a README text file in there. And below this, we have the information, Git basics. I'm learning the basics of Git and GitHub. So this repo is really just for experimenting. So again, sort of knew that the README file was there and then displayed that information. So that's it for our brief look at Git. It might not have seemed very brief to you, but I assure you that we only scratched the surface of what it can do. Now, you don't have to be an expert in Git in order to use GitHub, but you do need to be familiar with the concepts that we've mentioned so far, just at a minimum. Now, with that in mind, I want to leave you with some recommendations for learning Git. So in the next exercise, I'm going to show you some resources before we move on. For the rest of the course, we're going to be using a combination of the GitHub site that we're working with here and the GitHub desktop application. Now, those are going to work great for basic workflows, but eventually you're going to run into a situation that they can't handle. When that happens, you're going to have to fire up the terminal window and spend some time on the command line. Hopefully, I removed a little bit of anxiety that some of you may have had in dealing with the command line.